I'm Dominic Chaffee. I'll be your guide through the first 100 days of your startup. This is our fourth of our 5-part series, and today we're going to be talking about startup financing. Mostly we're going to be talking about deal terms, walking you through the term sheet, and a little bit about valuations as well. So let's get started. Here is my pride and joy of my hypothetical company, Hypochondriac Inc. Hypochondriac I envision as a mobile medical diagnosis application. There's 3 founders, late 20s, headquartered in St. Louis, Missouri, and they have a product. They have a viable product. It's producing revenues, and they want to expand. But their revenues are not enough to finance their expansions, so they need to raise outside capital. So the first thing they need to do is decide what type of securities are we going to offer to investors. There's 2 primary types of securities that can be offered: debt and equity. Debt securities are more like a loan. They're less risky than equity investment, but you also have a lower upside because your return on your investment is going to be limited largely to the interest rate on the loan. It's also less risky because the creditors, should the company go bankrupt, the creditors are paid first out of anybody. Debt also has a predictable return, being the interest rate, but you're going to have less control over the company. It's less control because as an equity security holder, you'll be afforded voting rights in the company a lot of times. And in that case, you can vote to appoint maybe somebody to the board of directors to represent your interests as a shareholder. One thing the debt holder can do to mitigate this risk of loss of control is to have restrictive covenants within the debt instrument. A restricted covenant would be, for example, would be maybe, all right, the condition for you to get this financing is that you might maybe need to keep this person on as manager. If he's fired, then you lose your financing. Something like that. Maybe you have to have a certain amount of reserve cash flows in order to keep your financing as well. That could be a restricted covenant. There's some infinite examples you could think of. So on the other side, we have our equity holders. These hold an ownership interest in the company. It's higher upside, but it's also higher risk. Their upside is basically infinite. It's uncapped. It's capped only by the success of the venture. The unfortunate side is it's the higher risk. Because the creditors are paid first in bankruptcy, it's very unlikely that equity holders are going to get paid anything should the company go under. Like I said, there's a higher variance of returns. It's less predictable. But you also get a little bit more control in the company because you might get those voting rights, and that allows you the ability to appoint somebody to represent your interest in the company. Equity securities can largely be either preferred or common securities. Common stock is going to be what the founders get. There's no special rights or anything in interest in the common stock. But preferred stock, as the name suggests, gets certain rights and privileges over the common stock, and actually has a little bit of the characteristics as debt as well. Some of those rights and privileges might be if the company goes under, they're the first people to get paid. They're going to get paid actually before the common stockholders. So first the debt holders get paid, then preferred stock, then the common stock finally. They might get also some other special voting rights as well, so on and so forth. We'll talk about that later. All right. So there's a couple of different types of different valuation calculations that an entrepreneur needs to know. These are very basic calculations. The first being the pre-money valuation of your business. The pre-money evaluation you calculate that by taking the total number of shares outstanding in the business and multiplying by the amount of shares offered, the price per share offered to you, or maybe the price per share that you're actually offering to investors. Now that kind of begs the question: how do you get the price per share? Well, that question is more of a corporate finance question, and I decided not to go over that into too much depth. What I can tell you about valuation is essentially valuation is the present value of expected future cash flows of an asset. Usually those cash flows are going to be discounted in a discounted cash flow valuation, which is the most popular way to value business. There's also other mechanisms that can be used. Sometimes they use a multiple of a certain item on a financial statement, such as revenues or EBITDA. They'll take a multiple of that, and then they'll arrive at a valuation that way. That multiple is dependent on the industry, the stage of the company, and even geography that can influence the multiple. So it's highly specific. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about corporate finance and valuation, one thing I would suggest that's really good is there's a free course on iTunes University. It's offered by NYU Stern Business School, which is a very prestigious business school in the United States. And they offer a free class on corporate finance and valuation specifically. And I've actually found it to be very helpful to learn some of the more basic concepts. Moving on, post-money valuation. Post-money valuation, we simply take our pre-money valuation and add to it the total amount of money that we're actually raising. That gives you your post-money valuation. So let's do a little example, a very simple example. Let's say we are offered $500,000 for 10% of hypochondriac. Here's our pre-money capitalization table. It's very simple. We have 900 outstanding shares. So 10% of the company post-valuation, or after the investor comes in, is going to be 100 shares. So at 900 plus 100, we got 1,000. So 100 shares. $500,000 divided by 100 shares equals $5,000 per share. Then we take the $5,000 per share and we multiply $5,000 per share by the number of current outstanding securities, 900. What we arrive at is a pre-money valuation of $4.5 million for this company. So post-money valuation, as we can see, we have Daisy. She has her 100 preferred shares for 10% interest in the company. So we simply take our pre-money valuation of $4.5 million. We add the amount that was offered, the amount of capital that was infused into the company by Daisy of $500,000, and we arrive at a $5 million post-money valuation. Sorry. So as we can see here, Daisy has her preferred shares. But what does that even mean? How do we characterize her preferences and preferences and privileges of her equity in the company? In order to determine that, we need to look at the term sheet, or we need to create a term sheet. A term sheet serves two functions. One is it's a summary of the financial transaction, using only the key terms. And the other function is that it serves as a guideline for later when the attorneys and maybe accountants or whoever needs to draw up the legal documents to actually create and close the financial transaction. Why do I say that? Because the term sheet is not actually it's not a contract. It is not a binding promise by an investor to an entrepreneur to give them funds. It is merely like a letter of intent. It serves an expression of interest. I'm interested in purchasing equity from you under these terms. So what happens is the entrepreneur comes to the table with their term sheet that they'd like to have, and the investor comes to the table with the term sheet that they'd like, and they come together and they try to work out a term sheet that can be agreeable for both sides. So let's go line by line through that term sheet, or at least some of the more important provisions, in my opinion. There's a kind of a list of, well, we're not going to go through all of them. So the first thing you want to look for is dividend provisions. What is a dividend? Maybe we all know. A dividend is a cash distribution from the reserves of the company that is declared. It can be declared by the board of directors to distribute to the shareholders of the equity shareholders of the company. It's up to the board of directors whether or not they want to declare a dividend. It is completely up to their discretion. But what a preferred shareholder can do is they can incentivize the board of directors to declare a dividend. And they do this by having a provision called a cumulative dividend provision. So let's look at the investor favorable provision would have a cumulative dividend, and it might have something up to 15% annum preference, which essentially functions like interest on a loan. So no matter what, they're entitled to 15% per annum per year on their interest, and they get a cumulative dividend, which means if the dividend is not declared by the board of directors in a given year or whatever term it may be, that is going to accrue and accrue and accrue term by term until when the board of directors finally does decide to give a dividend. The board of directors or the company must pay back all of the accrued dividends to the preferred shareholders before the common shareholders can get any money whatsoever. So you can see why a company might not necessarily like that. The founders are the ones that have the common shares of the company. So they're going to want non-cumulative shares, which means they do not accrue. They only get that 8% per annum once the board of directors does declare a dividend. So you're likely going to have to meet somewhere in the middle of the road. So in a hybrid solution, you could have a non-cumulative dividend, 8% per annum or whatever, preferential dividend. But you can also allow the preferred equity investor to participate according to their percent interest in the common dividends as well. So not only do they get their preferred dividend, but they also get the common dividend. So there's really no downside, except they're giving up a little bit on their initial preferred dividend. But actually, it could actually turn out better. They could actually get more money that way. All right. So the next thing you want to look for is the liquidation preference. Liquidation of a company is the sale of all or substantially all assets of a company. So an investor comes to the table and they say, I want 3 times my original purchase price plus any unpaid dividends upon the sale of the company. So that means whatever price that the preferred shareholder paid for their ownership interest, they get 300% of that plus all the unpaid dividends before any common shareholder gets any money from the sale of the company. So if you think about it, if you had a 3 times liquidation preference plus cumulative dividends, you're looking at a substantial portion of that transaction that the preferred shareholder is going to get before the common gets any. So company comes back and they want to argue for a 1 times purchase price preference or liquidation preference with no participation of common stock. 1 times, that's what we see. That's actually what I see most often is a 1-time purchase, 1-time 100% liquidation preference, which the investor is still getting 100% of their money back on the sale of the business. Not too bad. Maybe they'll have 106% or something like that too. I have not seen 3 times, but maybe that's more for higher level venture capital investors or something like that. So let's go to the middle of the road once again. So we say 1 times purchase price, then you also get your unpaid dividends in the transaction before any common get theirs. But you can also participate pro rata with the common shareholders for their interest in the company upon the sale of the company as well. So it could be a pretty sweet deal. Okay, redemption rights. Redemption rights is a tool used by investors to ensure that the entrepreneur is not looking to create a lifestyle business. By lifestyle business, it's something that the entrepreneur decides to keep a hold of indefinitely or maybe forever because they just are passionate about it or something like that. Well, that's not, the investors are trying to make money. They don't care about your passion. They're trying to get out. They're trying to exit their business. They're trying to exit their investment within about 2 to 5 year period. So they might put something into their term sheet. An investor favorable redemption clause would say, after the 3rd anniversary of the investment, the company must repurchase 1/3 of the shares that I invested in the company at whatever valuation. Then at the 5th anniversary, take 1/2. And then finally on the 6th anniversary, you take the remaining shares. So whether the entrepreneur likes it or not, the investor is going to get their exit from their company and get their money back. Company favorable, no redemption rights, none whatsoever. That's not usually too much of a problem. I think they usually get at this stage, the investor and the entrepreneur can usually get a feel for each other, whether this person is trying to start something and keep hold of it, which doesn't happen too often in this space. So middle of the road might be something like you must repurchase the share, 1/3 of the shares starting on the 5th anniversary rather than the 3rd, which could be, that's kind of a tight deadline, taking 1/3, having to pay out so much money on your 3rd anniversary of an investment. So maybe we'll wait to the 5th, and then we'll take 1/3 until on the 7th anniversary of the investment, the investor is going to get their complete 100% exit. Conversion. This is very important. Essentially, this is the option or mandatory situation where the preferred shareholder gets their preferred equity shares converted to common shares of the business. So there's two types, and they're not mutually exclusive. One or both can be present in a term sheet. So let's say voluntary conversion. And this at any time, the preferred equity shareholder can exchange their shares of preferred equity for common stock on a one-to-one basis usually. An automatic conversion is a little bit more complicated. On automatic conversion, the shares are automatically going to convert to common shares upon a qualified equity financing. That might be a sale of the business, or that might be another round of financing that exceeds a certain dollar amount, maybe $1 million or so. So if in the situation that there's another financing that exceeds $1 million, and in that financing, say the price paid per share or the valuation is 2 to 3 times what was paid originally by the preferred shareholder, those shares are going to be automatically converted to common shares. Now, think about back to the liquidation preference. For an investor that negotiated a 3 times liquidation preference, it would be no benefit to them to automatically convert their preferred shares upon the sale of a company that has a 2 times multiple, because they're already getting 3 times. So there's no reason they would want to do that. Basically, these automatic conversion clauses are in place. So say for the investor, the preferred investor that had maybe the 1 times liquidation preference, if there was a 2 to 3 times value being paid for the company, he would definitely stand to benefit from that. So you really have to look at that. It works with hand in hand with the liquidation preference as well. Essentially, it's to ensure to the I'm fumbling my words a little bit. It's to ensure that the preferred shareholder does not miss out on any of the upside that the common shareholder could get instead of them. So say if there's if the valuation of the company at the qualified equity financing is 5 times what they originally paid, the 3 times guy says, "Oh, I'm gonna convert. Why wouldn't I want to convert to common equity? They're getting a better deal than I am." So it's to make sure that investor does not limit his upside. Okay. Anti-dilution. This kind of falls in line with the conversion. Anti-dilution is a tool used by the investor which contemplates the possibility that the venture may not be as attractive in the future, or maybe the market may not bear as much. And so if the company needs a new investment, they're going to have to take it at a lower valuation to make it more attractive to investors to invest. That's called a down round. What an investor favorable anti-dilution clause would give you, also known as a full ratchet clause, it makes sure that the cost and ownership percentage of that original preferred investor remains the same as the new round. Okay, it remains the same in the new round. What that means is if the new investors get a better deal than the original investor, then the old investor automatically gets the same terms as the people that got the new better deal. A company favorable anti-dilution clause would not have anything like that. You just get your straight proportional adjustment. Your shares are now worth lower. It's your fault. You took the risk when we were more of a risky company or whatever. Next, we have a middle of the road, which is called weighted average anti-dilution. There's multiple types of calculations that can go into weighted average anti-dilution, one being broad-based and one being narrow-based. I won't go into those too much. But essentially, you're recalculating the value of the shares based on a certain formula. So it kind of falls right in the middle, someplace between the straight proportional and the full ratchet. And they're very popular. Okay. So what are some red flags that you need to look for on the term sheet if an investor comes to you? Well, underfinancing is one. And by underfinancing, I don't mean your valuation is not high enough. What I mean is if you're getting you don't want to be underfinanced because you need enough capital to get you from the stage of growth that you're in to the next stage of growth in order to maintain to get a higher valuation on that next round of financing. Obviously, you want to avoid a down round. If you're getting underfinanced and you don't meet those targets, you're going to lose traction, you're going to lose inertia with your business, and there's a good chance nobody's going to want to invest in you again. So what you want to look for is you want to lay out your budget and make sure you're getting appropriate financing to last you 12 to 18 months. Another thing you need to look for is unreasonable milestones within a term sheet. A milestone is, well, what's going to happen is that an investor might come to you and they want to protect themselves. So you might set up a financial plan and we'll say, you need to meet this certain amount of revenue at this point in time. And if you don't meet that target, then you will not get the additional tranche of financing from me. Well, if these milestones, if they're asking you to hit maybe 50, I'll preface with this. Targets, as we know in budgets, are speculative, and they're usually kind of an ivory tower view of what the budget can be or what it's going to be. So if the investor wants you to hit maybe 50 to 75% of that target, that's something that's probably reasonable. That's something you should be able to hit if you're competent with what you're doing. However, if they want you to hit greater than 75% of that target, I would apply a little bit more scrutiny in looking at that milestone and maybe to see if your investor and you and the entrepreneur are seeing eye to eye in that transaction and what your capabilities are. What too high of a target milestone can do is it can kind of handcuff the entrepreneur. Maybe if the startup businesses, they need to be fluid, they need to be dynamic in what they're doing with their operations. So if, say, an entrepreneur needs to pivot, decides that they need to pivot their operations to something a little bit different. However, they have to meet a target maybe next month. That would handcuff them. They would not allow them to do what's in the best interest of the company because they need to do what's in the best interest of the investor, and that kind of creates a conflict of interest to a degree. So I just want to thank you guys for coming once again. People that make this possible is the firm Aegis Professional Services and also iSelect. And what we specialize in, finding, helping entrepreneurs get private capital. The way we do that is we put together a package for the entrepreneur that includes an opportunity description, and this is our consulting side. The opportunity description includes the business plan, a market analysis, will help out with your financials, also valuation and the term sheet. On the legal side, we're going to make sure that all the disclosures are properly made to investors to make sure that's in compliance with the Securities Act of 1933, as well as we can restructure our business to make sure that it's ready to receive the equity financing as well. So that's Aegis. Once again, thank you for coming. and have a couple beers if you'd like and stick around. Thanks.